All right, we are all here and we will begin the meeting. Before us today, as you know, is our continued discussion on the start time parameters and the associated ramifications. And Larry has provided a document for us, the start and dismissal time parameters. And did you have anything that you wanted to say at the beginning?
Sure, I'll just again to kind of reiterate the sort of the purpose of this at a very high level. We've done a lot of talking about the interplay between the transportation system and start times. And so as our folks look internally at trying to create a different set of options, the wider or the clearer and the wider range of options that they have available to them, the more likely it's going to be that they're going to be able to, we would be able to take steps to get towards a later start time. So the wider the window between start and dismissal times at all levels, and the greater the number of variables or strategies that are acceptable to deploy, the more likely it's going to be that we can move in the direction everybody would like to move to. So that's what this is. It's just a discussion point. This is certainly likely not definitive of 100% of all the moving pieces that are involved, but I hope that it captures some of the major ones. And it's a good discussion to help guide staff, and probably a good discussion for the board to have, because we've never really interacted at this particular level before.
So I mentioned, before we start on this, I mentioned that I was in Washington, D.C. at the Advocacy Institute. This is probably a good time to share with you my conversation with the Fairfax County school board member. Fairfax County is a very large district. I think they have about 165,000 students. And they are very similar to us right now in the way that they have their configuration. Their high school starts at 7:20, their middle school starts next, and then their elementary starts later. And I was telling Annette before the meeting that I met her counterpart in Fairfax County. Happens to be a school board member. She, in 2004, founded an organization called SLEEP as an advocate for a later high school start time. And this was before she was on the board. She was advocating for it along with her co-founder. And then in 2010, she came on the board, and in 2012, she's one of a 12-member board of directors, if you can imagine having 12 of us in conversation together. But in 2012, they passed a resolution to change their start time, their high school start time, to a later start time. It passed 10 to 2, and they chose 8 a.m. because it was better than 7:20. It was before the American Association of Pediatrics report came out. And I just asked her to kind of take me through the process and get, just to kind of gain some insight into what they experienced and maybe what they learned from it. And she said that the net result of it is going to be that they will have 27 new buses. Those are not new purchases for them. They already had spare buses in their system, so they're going to have new drivers. And the district is estimating that it'll be about $4.9 million for them for the additional drivers that they're and the changes to the system. So she said that transportation was tasked with looking at options. They have the same issues that we have, the same challenges that we have had in looking to change this, and they couldn't come up with anything. She felt frustrated. They lost 3 months, and then they decided to go out and hire through an RFP process, hire outside help to kind of guide them through the process. So they ended up hiring Children's National Medical Center, which seems like an odd pairing, but it worked real well for them. They also had a new superintendent that was behind the later start. They had the head of their transportation department retired, and in spring of 2013, Children's came on, and then transportation asked for the scenario. They wanted to get the scenarios early so that they could run the numbers and figure that out. So in July 2013, they had the new superintendent. It took all summer to cost out a slide. She called a slide just moving the entire system forward. but they abandoned that in September, and in her words, started on real scenarios. They brought in her counterpart, one of the co-founders of SLEEP, they brought her into the conversation, and they came up with 25 different scenarios. Narrowed it down to 4, and then they went out to the community to talk about it. They created a video about why they were doing it. They had forums where they had people at different tables talk about the scenarios. They tasked them with coming up with the pros and cons of each scenario and then reporting out to the larger group. Before 8 a.m. was very unpopular. And they voted so the resolution was in 2012. They voted in October of 2014 on which option based on the feedback that they'd gotten from the community. So their new final plan, part of their challenge earlier was that even though schools started at 7:20 for high school, some of the students were being delivered at 6:45, and that was a problem on many fronts. So they've tightened that up in the final plan as well. They now will have, beginning this fall, 2015, they'll have high school that starts between 8 and 8:10, and ending between 2:45 and 2:55, and they standardized the school day because apparently there was some flexibility in the hours in the school day there as well. Their middle schools, they moved earlier. They're starting at 7:30 a.m. The alternative was 9:30, and they couldn't sell that to the community, she said. Elementary has a varied schedule, and they start anywhere between 8 and 9:20. And she said they had to promise the elementary parents that they weren't going to change it later, more than 5 minutes. They eliminated that false tier, the early, that she called the early delivery. And then I just asked her what things that they would do differently if they had it to do again. And she said they would have more community engagement meetings on the front end to she feels like there could have been a better scenario, an end scenario, if they had done that process. But let's see, what else? I talked with some parents in the district as well, but that's anecdotal. But by the end of that period of time, the coaches, which was one of the barriers, same things that we face, sports was a big issue. The coaches weren't thrilled, but they didn't come out in strong opposition, so they feel like they really have a plan that will move forward as well. So I'm offering you that context. As a beginning, I felt like it was really a great opportunity to talk to somebody that's been where we are and is successfully implementing this well. So,
can I add?
Absolutely.
So I brought to the board's attention the Children's National Medical Center report in conjunction. Is this on?
Right.
Hello? Mm-hmm. In conjunction with Fairfax School District, which you're talking about. And I perused their website, the Fairfax, Virginia School District, to see what information they had to community members. And this is what I found, that they listened to researchers in their messaging of later start times, and on the district website, and also on smartschoolstart.org, community members can find a wealth of information related to the positive effects of later start time, and also regarding why the district was implementing later start times and how they went about it. The information contained on these two websites is comprehensive and easy to find and navigate for community members. For instance, there's a page titled Why Change Start Times, Recommendations, and Frequently Asked Questions, which includes transportation information, as you were talking about, how start times will affect programs, etc. In addition, and I found this interesting, there are 21 pages of research studies listed that demonstrate the rationale behind the district moving to later start times. In short, the message sent by the district is that we want to educate the community as to why late start is important, and we know that by making available the research, the community is smart enough to understand and extrapolate from the literature why late start is critical to health, safety, and well-being of kids. Most importantly, all responses and comments made by the community, what you had referred to, Janet, during the process phase are easily accessible on the website so that any community member can read all comments and survey results to ascertain why the district came to the current late start scenario. And like you said, they looked at 4 different scenarios. My personal experience in reading through the information provided by the school district was that I felt a part of that process, even though I wasn't a part of their district. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I think the video that she said that they rolled out and they played at each of the forums was part of that information, educating the community on the why. And I feel like we're really fortunate that we have such huge support that we are past the why, and I think there still will be some education required for sure. But knowing that we have really strong support for the change is helpful on the front end.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly, for funding that study.
Yeah,
It was excellent.
I just like that all the information was available, whether everybody's educated or not, because it just made it so that it took the pressure off the district staff and administrators, I found, from my own experience, just to be able to pull up information and find out. They had a frequently asked question page. If there were just tons of resources for people to be able to navigate themselves.
And just anecdotally, I mentioned I talked to parents. My niece is a parent in the district, but she has elementary school students and is not really involved in this conversation. But I had occasion to talk to several other parents, and they felt like they had been, like the communication was good, like they had really had an opportunity to be engaged in the process, and that was good. So really a great opportunity. Your study, I think, triggered me to find somebody and talk to somebody since I was back there. It was a great opportunity. I had hoped to talk to Arlington as well because they made the change in 2001, but I couldn't connect with anyone. Nobody on their board currently was on the board when they made that change, so I was not able to connect with anyone. I haven't given up entirely, but it's couldn't do it for this day. So anyway, so did anyone else have anything that they wanted to bring to the table before we talk about the start and dismissal time parameters?
I do want to make one more comment, because that was going to be my last comment. But to start, I just wanted to thank each and every board member, and I sincerely mean this. We have all put in a lot of time, and we're trying to balance. We don't get paid, and it's volunteer, and I think each one of us does it out of the general, because we love kids and we want to do what's best for kids. And even though we look at things through different lenses, I know that each of us is committed to this process. And when I came on the board a year ago, we didn't have a resolution, and now it's really exciting that we do. And so I just want to thank each and every person for their time, and for the community members who have spent countless hours also helping me. Without you guys, that we might not have a lot of this information. So I just wanted to say that first. Going back to Smart Schools, which is part of that, smartschoolsstart.org, that's a mouthful to say, which is, speeding back on me, which is part of the Fairfax, Virginia School District. Well, they're a late start organization headed by Fairfax, Virginia School District, as I mentioned before, in the Children's National Medical Center. And in an effort to educate the community on later start times, they made several community presentations, which you talked about, which were titled School Start Change, Biology, Health, and Safety. What struck me as I reviewed their community presentation, which can be found on smartschoolstart.org, was the messaging to the community, which focused on the importance of later start to kids' health, socio-emotional well-being, and academic excellence. That's a positive aspects that they focused on. These facts on the benefits to kids by moving to a later start time is summed up in their final slide of the presentation to the community by the district and the Children's National Medical Center, which states, and I just thought this was interesting and wanted to start by saying that school start times change, school start time change, to do nothing is to do harm. So back to what I was saying about us coming to that resolution, I think that we've come far and excited on to the process, please.
I'll just add 2 quick things. One is that she was very clear that that the issue needed to be framed as a health issue. And and secondly, that Fairfax, Virginia board members get paid $20,000.
All of them?
All of them, yeah.
Well, I guess without
And they're
the
talking,
students, eh?
yeah. But like I said, it's a huge district, and they felt like that would give them the time to do more, and give a greater time commitment, so just share that piece, that little nugget.
That mic is really messy.
Is that full, that's narrative, or
I don't think so, so we'll try that one. That needs to be switched over.
Hello?
Ouch. Sorry.
Do any other board members have anything to add to that before we start the conversation?
Want to dig in?
All right, we'll dig in.
I hope that this study session, because we've had a number of them now, I'm just want to be sure that I at least am framing this correctly. And what we're doing is working toward a later start time at this point, working toward some way to implement it at this point instead of the thing that we've had before that Director Hayes referenced, the roadblock scenario that continues. Because this felt very roadblockish to me when I looked at it. So I just hope, it is my hope and it is my purpose today to get through this and have some kind of a resolution to get toward that 2017 at the very latest start time, but preferably something in the interim as well that meets the needs of community and students, because I believe that what Kimberly just said, that school start time change to do nothing is to do harm, is actually very accurate about this conversation, and I'd like to move on with it.
Well, I think we passed the resolution 5-0, so we are all agreed that we want to move forward on it. I don't think any of the challenges go away. I think that just, I read the survey results as a mandate from our community that this is really a very important thing to them. So that's what our work is today, to really figure out what our next step is and to talk with one another about what's acceptable and what isn't. So that's why we're here. Sorry you weren't able to. We might not be doing this again if we had been able to have all 5 of us at the last time. I'm sorry that you weren't able to be at the last conversation.
I think that this was a conversation at the last one, so I think that this could have been at the last one without me having a statement. So I'd like to move on today.
Yeah,
Let's get it
I
done.
think we all would.
Okay.
Were you leaning into
I was leaning in, but I think I would have been redundant, so it's all good.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So how should we do this? Should we start going down the parameters? And I don't know if you folks, if you have
Cindy,
the
can that be
parameters,
displayed on the screen?
just so you can reference what we're talking about. Now, and I guess I do, what I'm going to say is not redundant. So in terms of discussing the parameters, and I think the feedback from Fairfax is a very good point that whatever we whittle down to, I think still it's in our responsibilities to bring it to the community in some way. You know, whether we take a year of community feedback, I don't know if that's necessarily the route we want to go down, but I want to say that whatever we go down, I think it's incumbent on us to solicit feedback on that. And secondly, starting off with talking about, earliest acceptable start times and latest acceptable dismissal time. I don't want to get to the point where if we say a specific time, but then folks do some studying and say, well, if we had 5 more minutes, we could do this much better solution. I don't want it to be too restrictive. Is that understandable? Okay.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, crunching in the microphone. Yeah, I do want to move forward. I don't want to keep having this conversation. I think identifying the next step is a great opportunity. The challenge for me with the parameters is that I feel like I can answer these personally. I don't feel like I can answer in a way that's representative of the entire community, and that's where it becomes difficult So I'll
Well,
I'll
and,
put that caveat on there.
I mean, this is definitely something good to go through, but could we use this in conjunction with the options? That, because a lot of these parameters are inside the options, so perhaps starting off with the parameters that'll help us with the spreadsheet discussion as a next step. Does that sound good? Again, trying to whittle down from all this
Just
data.
for clarification, and then are you interested in adding a year of
No,
community
I was saying
conversation about it? Is that what you
exactly
were
the
saying?
opposite. I was
Okay,
saying
thank you.
exactly the opposite, but I think it's, I'm hoping, and this is me, that we'll get it to perhaps get an idea of where our opinion is based on our experience, get a feel for what we're thinking, and then discuss what we want to do from there in terms of, and I know it's not a definitive thing, I do think just communication and soliciting feedback should be part of this discussion, but I don't want it to necessarily be up front, it can be at the end based on where we get to. I know that's very non-specific, but
Pretty vague.
it is pretty
understand
vague,
it,
but
that's why I asked for
yeah,
clarification.
yeah, for sure, I am trying to think of a process of how we go through this, work through this, and combine not only discussing all this information and getting to the point where we can solicit more requests in terms of data for options and getting very specific with really what options are there, but then taking those very specific options and discussing what we feel is the best way to solicit feedback.
And if I may add, to
Yeah.
keep this in mind while we're going through this process, based on what you're saying, if we were to embark, because I know that's, if we're talking about community participation, and I'm not
Yeah.
saying we shouldn't do that we're talking about pushing it out farther. So if we embarked on incremental change, we could potentially allow half the high schoolers in our district to get an hour plus more of sleep this next year, which amounts to conservatively 2,000 students, 1 hour extra sleep a day over 180 school days, which is equal to 360,000 hours of extra sleep. If we implemented the change at once in 2015, earlier, which might not fit with the model you're saying, based on a lowball estimate of 4,000 high schoolers in our district, the extra hours of sleep would amount to an astounding 720,000 hours of extra sleep for our high school students. Conversely, each year that we wait to implement later start results, by my conservative estimates, students would experience 720,000 hours of lost sleep each year, which I personally find not acceptable, and I'm not saying it's not
Yeah.
based on the research and negative implications to kids' health.
And I'm not trying to sound obstructionist, I'm just trying to frame the conversation, because I think there are some options that are much less, I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't have a negative connotation, but much less complicated than others. And, might be simpler in terms of time frame and communication for sure. And so I'm not meaning to sound obstructionist, I'm meaning to just frame the conversation. But maybe we should just dive into the conversation. I don't want to take up too much of people's times.
Yeah, let's start with the earliest acceptable start time. Got high schools, junior highs, elementaries, and special needs preschools of the different categories. So, John, did you come in with a,
First off, that the process, as I already said, I found quite Amy's phrase obstructionist and kind of a blocking exercise. I've already stated what I think we should be starting school at 8:30. I think we ought to do it in 2015. I've already stated that. That hasn't changed. On the other hand, I realize that this board wants to deliberate more on this and find something that is more mutually acceptable. I think we've had a suggestion from the community. Aileen Fisher mailed in an email recently that outlined a tier 3 modification that I thought was perfectly acceptable, in that it moves us toward saving some of that time, as Kimberly just mentioned. That even any kind of change would be better than none, but it is an interim move. I still want to see us start at 8:30 eventually in 2017. So I would be absolutely willing to move toward that in incremental stages if that's what it took.
And then what time would junior high, elementary, and special needs
I think
preschool
junior high
start?
should start at the same time.
Because, one of the options in the research is flipping elementary and high school. What do you, elementary times? Do you have a feeling
Well,
about that?
I'm just concerned about that in terms of
Oh, that's the first thing.
the
Yeah.
email we received today from a mother who had her child hit by a car.
Mhm.
So I think that we need to be mindful of safety and
And then elementary, to complete the thought, elementary earliest acceptable start time? In your perfect plan?
Earliest.
In your perfect world, I should say, in,
in my perfect
Your
world,
desire,
this would already
yes.
be done.
pardon?
So, I'm open to discussion as long as safety is fully considered by the district.
So,
Are we going to go through the parameters also? Okay.
we're starting at the top
Yeah.
with the start times. And then the latest dismissal times, Dawn? Just completing that
Like I
thought.
said, I did not like this, and I won't be answering those questions that specifically. I'm willing to move forward in whatever way we can now.
Okay. Kimberly, did you have thoughts on the earliest start and latest dismissal?
So the importance of the 8:30 versus 8 o'clock start time is, again, according to the CM, just going to abbreviate now, report. They said that even 30 minutes earlier than the recommended 8:30 start time by the American Academy of Pediatrics can have significant negative impacts on our children. The researchers put forth that earlier start times are a recent cultural shift based on financial implications that weren't about adults, weren't about children, but were about adults. And the purpose of this report was to look out for the best interests of kids. With that said, obviously when they partnered with Fairfax, Virginia, they couldn't get to that 8:30 start time, so it became 8 or 8:10. I'm going to make just one little caveat here. I can't remember which school district it is, but they implemented start times, half the district first and then the other half the district later. So just as a little caveat. So high school would be 8:30, and I realized that would be my preferred time based on what the research says. And I think if we're making an objective, if we're trying to do this objectively, then that would be the ideal, but that would depend on if we can get there. And then as we go down the parameters, I'll explain more about why I think junior high is movable and why elementary is movable. Special needs preschool, I'm not sure about quite how those work in our district or what those start times are, I have to admit. And then conversely, the acceptable dismissal time, I think, is just whatever time. If we're starting 8:30, then it's how many hours after 8:30.
Yeah, the intent is that you're right, it has to be at least 6.5 hours between the start and dismissal time. But if there's a window of 8 hours, or if there's a window of 8.5 hours from the earliest acceptable to the latest acceptable start and dismissal times, that gives a broader range for planning within. So that's what
Preferably, I think that no school would get out after 4 o'clock. I think we already have elementaries that are dismissing quite late. I know my daughter doesn't get out till 3:35, and I think some schools, maybe 3:45. You could correct me if I'm wrong on that, 3:50. So again, as we go down this list, I'll make more comments about how they found that athletic programs, as you said, haven't been impacted by getting out later, and some of these fears have been alleviated once they've gotten the process rolling. So, but I'll make more comments to that as it's appropriate in our
So I
discussion.
heard you say 4 o'clock latest for any grade level. Is that?
Yeah, and again, I don't think that's written in stone. I think if we came up with a plan and they said the district said, hey, we have to let 5 of the elementary schools out at 4:10 or one of the high schools out at 4:10, well, then maybe that's what we have to look at. So I'm kind of going based on what I saw in this report, which were the latest dismissal times, and they were 4 o'clock. But again, the research doesn't talk about latest start times unless you're looking at it impacting programs, which they have found didn't prove to be true in most cases. So I think no matter where we put it, the community adjusts from what the research of studying these schools has shown. And the students adjust and the athletic departments adjust.
Sandy, do you want to weigh in?
So I guess I will echo what Amy and Kimberly have already said, that I'm a little worried about setting a specific time because it limits our options, and I would hate for us to be still at this same time because we couldn't do a specific time, and so it becomes an either-or scenario. And I'll just use, I'll just feed off the example Kimberly just gave. If we start at 8:30, 7th period then goes to 4:15. So if we say, oh, we have started 8:30, but we can't go past 4 o'clock, I don't want it to be a, oh, then we can't do it conversation. So I'm a little uncomfortable, I guess, about creating a really specific, it has to start here, it has to end here, so that we've got the flexibility to make this work. Also, it had an email, I think we all received a similar one, that kind of had an aha moment that we're trading one for the other, that our elementary schools have driven our start and end times for all levels. And it sounds kind of like we're just flipping it so that high schools drive the start and end times for junior high and elementary. And I feel like it should be about what's best for all of the age groups. If we're opening this up anyways, we should be looking at, and that's probably why we can't really answer what's the best start and end time for elementary schools, that we haven't really looked into what is the best time for those kids to be in school. And I think there is a circadian rhythm study that says by 3 o'clock they're starting to wind down in terms, and do
For the
we lose
younger kids?
Yeah, for the younger kids, and do we then lose education opportunities for kids if we have them in school till, say, 5 o'clock? So I think that it all needs to go back into our community and our task force and people that have way more expertise around this than I do, and give that flexibility of, okay, in these parameters, what works for all of our kids, so that we don't trade a good for a harm situation.
And then there was one other thing that this board member said, and she wishes that they had asked parents and students, what's an ideal start time for you and what's an ideal start time for your child, because she recognized that that might be a different answer for each one. But she would have liked to have started with that as a
And I hate for us
as a
to
question.
where Fairfax is, where we just flip out high school and junior high or middle school, so that all we do is just trade the harm. And so instead of it's the high school students getting up too early, it's our middle school kids getting up too early in an effort to solve this. And so that's why I'm a little reluctant to get too strict of a time parameter, so that we don't end up in a situation where we're in a desperate effort to get to a later high school, starting for high schools, that we harm somebody else in the process.
So for instance, if we were to task a task force or somebody with studying it, and not studying it, but with coming up with options to move us forward, do you have any absolutes for the times that would give some framework around it?
I mean, obviously I don't want it to be as early as it is now, right? So later than now would be certainly a parameter. I'm kind of, going off of Amy. I mean, if we say 8 o'clock and everybody says, oh, we can get to 7:55, or we can get to 8:25, and we've all said 8:30, but that 5 minutes really jeopardizes anything. I don't want it to be in this situation where everybody comes back and says, no, we can't do it. So that's why I'm reluctant to really give a firm time, because I don't want this to get nixed because, oh, you said this time and we can't do that time, but oh, it turns out 5-10 minutes earlier was just still infinitely better than what we have now is totally doable. So, I mean, around 8 would be lovely.
For all levels or for high school? You're talking high school
Well, I'm
specifically?
talking high school, middle school, and I guess elementary, I haven't seen any studies or any information as to what is best for their learning, and that seems to be what our conversation should be about, not what's best for high school students, for elementary students to start, but what's best for elementary students to start. And I don't think we've even had that conversation, and maybe that should be something that our elementary school task force can help us out with.
There's something right here about elementary, and can I read that really quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
It says, one strategy that is commonly used to overcome potential transportation costs is what's commonly referred to as flipping secondary, high school, and elementary bell schedules. This may have the added benefit of being more in sync with circadian rhythms in both groups. Younger children typically fall asleep earlier and wake earlier. So, and there is a lot of research, and that is out there about how the circadian rhythm is different for younger children versus older children. You're right in what you said, that they tend to fall off after 3, so starting kids earlier makes more sense. And that's what some of the school districts have chosen.
Amy?
So for, I too am apprehensive about flipping high school and junior high, having the junior high kids start at 7:30. That makes, I agree, it seems to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. So if I had to pick a time, with that variable in there, I would say 8 o'clock for high schools and junior highs at an earliest. I like, the earliest acceptable start time being 8 o'clock. For elementary schools, I agree with the circadian rhythm. I do have the safety concern though that Dawn mentioned. So for that reason, because of safety, I have a hard time thinking about elementary school kids walking to school for an earlier than 7:45. I kept crossing out 7:45 and 8 a.m. for elementary schools. I know the special needs preschool, I believe, is predominantly bused, so that you don't have walkers is not as much of an issue. I happen to live in an area where there's no sidewalks, and there was a girl coming home from an after school about 3-4 years ago, coming home from Sunrise and was hit. I mean, it's just as much a safety concern for the elementary school kids, which is what drives my latest acceptable dismissal time. I didn't put down one for high schools and junior highs. I have an opinion as a parent, but I think that's just, as a parent, it's one opinion, and I would want to leave it open for possibilities and brainstorming, but because of safety, I have a hard time thinking of the kids walking home much later than they are right now. So again, another 5-10 minutes, yeah, a much past 4 makes me really nervous.
So latest, did I hear you say 3:45?
Yeah, plus or minus.
And that was elementary.
Yeah,
Okay.
high school and junior high, I don't have a specific.
Yeah, and I have the same issue with that you have all talked about, that it's difficult to assign a time. 8 o'clock is what Fairfax County was found possible. At 8 to 8:10, right, that window. And that was before the American Association of Pediatrics report came out. So the board member I talked to was not happy with the end result for the start time, but recognized that was what was possible, and it was better than 7:20 as it currently is. But I guess my perspective is that I would share Sandy's perspective that this is the work for a task force to figure out what is possible and what is the best option for our community. And other than wanting a later start time, for high schools, I'm pretty flexible on how that happens based on what the community says they want. So it's pretty wide open for me. So moving on, I think we covered the latest acceptable dismissal time somewhat. Did anyone have anything else any strong opinions on dismissal time that you want to share before we move into the specifics?
I don't know that it's a strong opinion in terms of the numbers, but I think even at the high school level, there is an impact at the end time when you're, and I know that I've heard that we're all very interested in the 7th period. It's the 7 hours, 7.5 hours, it does impact the end time. So I guess just kind of keeping that in mind of making sure that we can make all of that work.
So accommodate a 7th period. Anybody else on that? There is coffee over on the sill, if anybody is in need of it. Okay, so moving on.